Brendan McNamara is my name. I'm the General Manager and Senior Consultant at RapidMap Services. We specialise in asset data capture and condition inspections. And I guess many of our clients are dealing with D-SPEC and O-SPEC. And I'd just like to talk a little bit today, probably not from a real technical background, it's more from how we work with the clients in looking at their D-SPEC and O-SPEC requirements. So I will just attempt to share my screen. Hopefully you can see a blue background PowerPoint there.
Yep.
Sorry about that. With D-SPEC, I think it's really common when clients include D-SPEC requirements in their project specifications. This is something that comes up a lot. They say, well, look, we want our data to be D-SPEC compliant. And typically they know already a lot about their pits and pipes. They know what they want to collect. This, you know, typically the majority of the focus is on pits and pipes. Additionally, you know, a few other assorted assets such as end walls and culverts. Some of the rural councils would be looking at open drains and channels. There's a few channels in the suburban areas, but mostly rural. But it's a fairly small list, and people have to get their head around it with stormwater assets. So D-SPEC actually sets out the requirements for drainage assets really well, and because the mainstream components or assets in stormwater drainage is fairly limited, well known, it's easy for clients to deal with what they need to know. So they generally have a pretty good idea of what they want, and I suppose, you know, typically it's all right. Pits, what sort of pit is it? What sort of lids it got? Length, width, depth, those type of things. Potentially they might want to know if it got steps or has it got litter baskets, but it's fairly straightforward for the pits. The pipes, similarly, they'd want to know which pits it connects to, so the MIDs of those pits. They'd want to know the inverts of the pipe. They'd want to know the diameter of the pipe and the material, and potentially things like lining and joint types and stuff like that. So it's pretty straightforward, and it's fairly easy to work with the clients in these regards. And we would typically point out anything they haven't already thought of. And I suppose there's two main purposes that they do the work in stormwater drainage, and that's for asset management purposes, but it's also for flood modelling. So we recommend to clients that if you're looking at asset management only, well, you don't need a lot more to cover for the flood modelling. So, you know, important things like accurate invert levels and pit sizes and pipe dimensions and things like that, but you don't need a lot more to get the flood modelling data out than you want purposes. So yeah, I think the D-SPEC requirements is fairly easy to work with, and most of the clients, as I say, they've got a pretty good idea. Open space assets, though, it's a bit of a different story. It's not very common to have O-SPEC included in a project specification. And why is that? Well, I guess I'm sort of reading between the lines a bit, but I think in open spaces, you've got such a massive variety of asset types. And for many of those assets, the only thing they've got in common is the fact that they're in open spaces. So it's such a huge range of different assets occur. And as well as that, because the assets are so varied, the list of attributes that people want to collect is also really long and varied. The O-SPEC's really comprehensive in the list. It's got and it's equally comprehensive with the list of attributes required for these assets or these asset groups. So it lists many pages of asset groups and potential attributes, varied things from amenities, fences and walls, minor structures, playing fields, playgrounds, playground and exercise equipment, boardwalks, bins, gates, etc., etc., etc. And as you can imagine, the things you need to know about a fence or a wall are very different than what you need to know about a piece of playground equipment or a gate or a bin or a boardwalk or whatever it might be. So all those pages through A-SPEC give you a very good idea of potential attributes. But I think the main issue the clients have is the fact that there's too much information. They can't really get their head around it all. There's pages and pages. How do I put this all together and how do I work out what I need to know? What a lot of them have done, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they've actually applied some of the components of A-SPEC into their specifications and their data models. They probably just haven't labelled it that way. As I say, we don't actually see the words A-SPEC included in many specifications. Well, so how do we help those clients out? I guess what we do is we use our experience and knowledge to advise the clients. I mean, we've been doing this work since 1994. I've been there since 1994, so I'm waiting for my gold watch next year. What we do with the clients, we suggest the most common assets, and sometimes this involves assets they may not have thought of. They obviously know the main things they have. All right, we've got sporting fields and associated sporting equipment and infrastructure. We've got shelters and other minor structures. We've got seats, bins, drinking fountains, barbecues, all these types of things. They're aware of those, but they may not think of other things that are important assets in the park. Little things that sometimes are very important, like backflow devices. They never think of that one, but it's an important asset to maintain their irrigation assets, and little bits and pieces like that. So we suggest to clients, we have long lists of assets that we can come up with, and based on where the client is situated, they may or may not have that. So if they're by the coast, they might have some marine assets. If they're well inland, well, they're not going to have those, and we don't include them in our suggestions. With them and suggest the attributes that are most commonly used, and these are set out, asset by asset, of the typical attributes that you may want to look at. I suppose we also point out what attributes aren't very valuable, or what attributes you're unlikely to be able to establish in the field. Perhaps a good example of that is we're often asked to collect manufacturer details and model details. Now, what comes back when we do that is a lot of unknown, because there's not many assets in the field which actually have a model number or a manufacturer on them. Some of the playground items do, occasionally a few other assets, but typically most assets don't have them. So we advise the client, rather than coming back with a manufacturer or model number and 1,000 that don't, they're probably better off to ignore that. It's often the case too that when they replace these assets, they're not going to replace them with what was there. They're going to standardise, and so all the seats we're going to put back, the new seats are all going to be of this type and model. Or all the bins we're going to use, the bin surrounds, we're going to use this type of model. Assets that are existing in the field might have been there for 20 or 30 years, and who knows what changes have happened over that time. So some of those things are not so important. And how we deal with these assets and attributes, we prepare a matrix for the client, and I'll show you one in a moment. We set out a matrix of assets and attributes, and we feed that back to the client. to give them some ideas is what we advise, and then they can make some adjustments to that matrix, say, well, we also want this or we don't want that. And when that's all approved, then we can actually do our setup and commence field inspection. So I'll give you a little bit of a look at the typical matrix. So there's a typical matrix that we would do. It's just got a long list of assets down the left-hand side. I hope you can read that okay. I might just blow it up a little bit. We suggest what sort of object it should be, so whether we capture it as a point or as a polyline or a polygon. And then we look at typical attributes that you collect. So some things have a type, others don't. Most things have a material. If it's a polygon feature, it needs an area, or if it's a linear feature, it needs a length. Things have a width. Other things need to know how many. So how many hot plates are on a barbecue? How many hoops in a bicycle rack? Or how many benches on a picnic setting? These type of things. Capacity, what's the capacity of a bin or a water tank? And then little bits and pieces like if it's a drinking fountain, has it got a dog bowl attached to it, or has it got a separate tap? If it's a barbecue, has it got a tap on it? Even things, I think this comes out of A-SPEC. If it's a boardwalk, is it above water? So we set out these things to try and make it simple for the clients to determine what they want to capture. We also break the materials down a little bit. They often get put back into something a little bit more like material one or something like that. But we look at materials of the base of assets, or we look at the pole or the post material. We look at roof materials or frame materials. This makes it a little bit clear as what we're actually capturing it from both the inspector's point of view in the field, what do I need to capture about this asset, and from the data going back to the client so we can standardise it. The worst thing that happens in data capture is by saying we're going to get a material and you start off and say, well, it's steel. And then you say it's steel and timber, and it's steel and timber and concrete. And already you can make a lot of combinations of that by placing them in different orders. And when you get the data at the end, the council tries to do some sorting of data and finds out they've got, 300, material types when it just hasn't been standardised. So we break them down into individual materials. We look at condition, photos, things like that. So that's just a bit of an example of how data structures are set up for council based on A-SPEC. There's a few little things that we do that are probably not exactly compliant with A-SPEC, and so an example of that is barbecues. So I think in A-SPEC they're set out from memory. I think they're as a electric barbecue or a gas barbecue or a wood fire barbecue. We're trying to restrict the types, both for our purpose of capturing the data, but also for the client to be able to try and limit how many types. So we'd capture a barbecue with a type of electric, gas, wood-fired, etc. So that's sort of how we work through and help the client establish what they want. There's probably a few more things down the bottom. You can see the list goes on. Some of the lists we try and standardise as much as possible, and we try and help them a little bit by clients typically say to us, we don't want too many asset types in our asset management system. So, and we don't want too many assets in there. So we try and combine a few things. So, and a couple of examples of that is bollards is a good example. We capture bollards as individual things or a bollard fence. So if there's more than 3 bollards in a row or 3 or more and they're all the same and they're evenly spaced, we capture them as a bollard fence. So there's one bollard fence and it's got 100 bollards in it. It's not 100 assets coming back to the client to say, these are all bollards. So it helps them manage a little bit and also doesn't overload their system too. A few other things we do just helps to bring down the number of assets and standardise things. I think an example of that would be a playground. So type and the edging type as attributes of the playground, especially the edging. I don't think there's any need to create a separate asset for the edging that runs around the playground. It's just an attribute of the playground. You already have the playground as a polygon. The edging runs around the outside. You can establish the length of it from the perimeter of the polygon. It just, once again, helps to standardise that. I've probably used up most of my time. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to discuss with everyone today, just to outline how to work with clients, in relation to A-SPEC and D-SPEC. And I think once clients get something like this matrix back, it helps them to well, it just makes it a bit easy for them. It doesn't overcomplicate it, and they don't have to worry about working their way through, dozens of lists of various asset types and potential attributes. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Brendan. It's a very informative presentation.